Hello, my name is Mandolin Royal, and today I'm cooking chicken. The bird we have in front of us today was 15 weeks old. He's American Bresse. And I'm going to keep the spices relatively simple, and I'm going to be using a cast iron Dutch oven with a low and slow temperature and method. So this Dutch oven, it's vintage. It's from my grandmother. It's made in England a pretty long time ago. And I used it for the first time yesterday with really amazing results. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process and fill you in on the details on how to see this through. I have preheated the oven to 250 degrees, and I'm bringing the bird up to room temperature because you don't want to start from cold, and you also want to keep track of how long that takes and put your hands on it to feel this is still pretty chill from when I brought it out of the refrigerator. So once I feel that the temperature has come up just enough, I'll go ahead and coat the outside and the inside of the bird with avocado oil, and we're just going to spatter just a little bit of salt, pepper, and ground up garlic, and I may go out to the greenhouse and grab some fresh thyme to put on the inside of the bird. So I'm going to go ahead and keep getting set up, and then I'll walk you through this process. All right, so the bird is coming up to temperature so that I can prep it and get it into the oven. And since I breed these birds and I need to monitor these birds for results and to look for guidance in how to breed forward from here, because this bird was not a breeding contender. So here he is in his most useful glory. And if you notice, the knuckle off this leg, it's broken off. And that has me now questioning meat to bone ratios and if I perhaps got a little too thin on his bone for this particular bird, because it snapped clean off in the plucker, which is not an ideal result. Now, granted, hand plucking would have totally avoided this, but it is what it is, and now I have to think about it. Some other notes on this particular carcass: that is beautifully wide of body. The spread here in between the legs, the fleshing all the way down the keel, and the breast meat, that is nice to see and feel. If you've been watching my videos and looking at what I post online, we're going to check that all-important pin bone spacing. That's these bones right here. And they feel a bit pointy. And the width that's in here, this guy at 15 weeks old, mind you, this is 3 fingers on a male bird that is not mature. So he was stacked on structure, especially in the width department. Another very important measurement is the distance from the end of the keel right here down to those pin bones. Again, 3 solid fingers. So that means when I processed this bird, it was really easy to get inside the cavity and get my whole hand in there. Since I am holding a camera with one hand and I only have this hand available for teaching, not going to go all the way in that carcass right now. When I turn the bird over and we look at the back, he's 3 fingers. Well, more than that, as it turns out. 4 fingers wide. And I'm looking at from one wing across the back to the other wing. What is that distance there? That's very important for the width. One of the reasons that I opted for a white bird, see that right there? That's a pin feather. See that right there? That's a pin feather. But they're white, so you really can't tell. But if they were black, boy, you could see that. If they were red, you could see that. So I'll just kind of pull them out and set them to the side, because it does bother me a little bit, but it doesn't really matter that much. Now, I'm not using any butter in this recipe. I know sometimes when you watch chicken cooking recipes, they'll separate the skin, they'll start peeling it back, and they will jam herbs and butter in between the skin and the muscle. But on this bird, I'm not doing it. I don't do it very often because it almost overpowers the natural flavor of the chicken. And when a bird like this has as much flavor as it does, you don't need to overdo it on spices. I am most concerned about how much fat there is this inside on the, I guess you'd call it a fat pad on the back side of the bird. This is all fat right here. And that carries through the whole rest of the bird. When you see these ridges here like this, these are also going to have fat deposits. Fat is also up in between the ribs. So this ends up being a self-basting, self-buttering bird. And I don't need to do anything special. The only reason I'm coating the outside with the avocado oil is just to get the spices to stick to the outside. I'm using it as an adhesive, not a lubricant. So I did go out to the greenhouse and I got my fresh thyme. That's going to go inside. I'm going to need both hands to get herbs and oil inside the cavity there. And then we're going to resume this video, talk about how to get this bird into a very tasty result. Alright, so I know I said I was going to go ahead and prep this bird and then talk about it some more, but I added lemon juice because can't go wrong with that. And also I had some more notes because I forget, in, I guess you'd call it the advanced phase that I'm in with this, I forget what some of you guys may not already know. So this bird is a purebred, standard bred example of our American Bresse flock. And if you already have American Bresse, you might not see carcasses like this. This has been hard fought and hard won through the power of breeding selection to get to where I have a bird like this to put on my table. It's worth it. I'm living it now. This is fantastic to see that this bird, I didn't need to keep it for breeding, and it's here now to provide us with a meal. And this particular bird, I removed him from the flock because he had paler than desired leg color, which is trivial. He had a comb that was probably going to get oversized and wonky, which technically also trivial. And other than that, that's why he's here. Which is actually really fantastic because I had to work for this, man. I did not go out and buy birds and have this result immediately. This is just from operating our flock the way that I do, and being picky and being selective and breeding for these important traits so that we could then supply ourselves with this kind of result that I did at home on the homestead. So maybe sometimes I don't give things enough credit, but I think some credit is due here. Even with this leg breaking off in the plucker, it just gives me something else to pay attention to and something else to monitor in terms of the meat to bone ratio, which means, in case you didn't know what that meant, that is how much meat you get from a bird in relation to how much bone they had. The American Bresse, they're supposed to have a thin and delicate bone. And from my history with breeding and showing dogs historically, you've got to watch stuff like this. This is too thin on this bird. And when I decided to call this bird for the freezer, I wasn't accounting for this. This was something that became apparent after the fact. And doing these cooking examples helps to bring that kind of stuff to light. But anyways, moving on. Another little side note. We buy our salt in 50-pound bags, and then I separate them into jars for long-term storage. And I'm not going to dip my hands in there to get the salt I need for putting some on this bird. So I pour some out into this bowl, and that gives me the freedom to reach in, grab a pinch, and start sprinkling. If I have extra, I drop it back into the bowl, and I proceed into the inside of the bird and into all the little nooks and crannies. And what the salt does is it pulls out some moisture, and if there's any residual blood or anything like that, the salt helps to pull that out. It does not retain moisture. And salt is actually pretty important in cooking on a scientific level. I can't explain all of it, but I know that it does stuff. So by taking my bulk salt and putting it in this bowl, I can use it with my same hand after it's touched on raw chicken, and I do not contaminate my jar of salt in that process. Alright, so I have smothered, covered, and coated this bird with some of the spices, and I'm going to work some of that in. I haven't yet put the oil on the bird. I'm going to do that when it's into the pan. But working it in also helps. And I'm also noticing that there's plenty of stick power to the bird. Maybe I don't need to use the avocado oil at all. Maybe I'll try that. I don't know. We'll find out here in about 2 seconds. But the temperature is starting to feel right. It's just ever so slightly cool to the touch. And that means I can go ahead and get it in the oven and get dinner moving. So like I said earlier, I have the oven preheated to 250 degrees for a low and slow process in Grandma's Dutch oven. And it's going to be 30 minutes per pound. So I'm going to set the timer for 2 hours based on the weight of this bird, which was 3 pounds and 12 ounces. I'm going to check on it at that 2-hour point, and I'm going to be looking for the legs to just fall off this bird. If that's not quite happening, I'm going to leave it go a little bit longer. Now, it does mention in online instructions when you look this up to put the bird in the pan breast side down. And the reason for that is if you think about where your heating elements are in your oven, it's cooking more often than not from the bottom up. And this is the thickest and densest part of the bird. So by putting it in there with the breast side down, you're going to get more efficient cooking and more even cooking. So even though the bird looks the best from this angle, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the pan upside down to get those better results. Because cooking, it's about the result, not what it looks like. So I'm going to keep going here and move this bird over into the Dutch oven, finish the prep, and then start that timer. Alright, he's all jazzed up and ready to go. Temperature feels right to go into the oven. And I've got it breast side down. So it's not as pretty of an image, but it's the cooking that matters. So I'm going to go ahead and put the lid on. And there is no water in the bottom. There is only the residual avocado oil that I did end up using. just kind of lightly coating the bottom of the pan. Now, what's going to be really neat to see is how much juice comes off this bird that is still in that pan, and you can certainly use that for other recipes. You also can do different flavor profiles. You don't have to do it exactly this way. You can put celery inside of the cavity. You can take a whole lemon and quarter it and put that inside the cavity. You can use rosemary. There's a lot of options to figure out what flavor profile you want to do, and you can absolutely change that up with every bird that you cook. But for now, this guy's going in the oven for 2 hours at 250 degrees, and we're going to check on him then. All right, so it's been 2 hours at 250 degrees for this 3-pound, 12-ounce heritage type chicken. I have not temperature probed it, which I'm going to do right now. The done temperature for chicken is 165 degrees. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. We've already surpassed that. So technically this bird is done. But I'm going to go ahead and use 2 spatulas to flip this bird over and see how loosey-goosey and fall off the bone that it is. And pending that result, I'll go ahead and put it back in, or I'm going to go ahead and call it done. We'll find out. So I've turned the bird over, and you can see where some skin has slipped off and some skin has pulled up the bone here, which is another indication that it is done. Our internal temperature on this side is approaching 200 degrees, so it is done in terms of temperature. I'm not going to use my hand to test it because it's going to be really toasty. But if I use a utensil, start pulling it, that's pretty loosey-goosey. So I'm going to go ahead and call this done. It smells incredible. And I'm not going to be trusted to part this bird out and get additional video of it because we're going to go ahead and start eating it. And it's going to be gone pretty quick. So this absolutely smells like a success for the low and slow cooking method with this bird. So we're going to go ahead and get started on dinner because this is going to be delicious.